Oh, I mean, historic preservation
Yeah.
can be quite financially remunerative if you do it, you know, if you choose well on the buying side.
Ah, the
And
trick
that's
is always the buying
buy low,
side.
sell high.
Is
No,
that
but
right?
seriously, buy low, sell high is something everybody says and nobody wants to do. Because emotionally, you have to go counter to your emotions. You know, what happens is most people, the way they buy is they watch things go up and up and up, and then when they can't stand it anymore because they're afraid to be left behind, that's when they buy. Well, now they're buying high, hoping to sell higher.
Which is why they're in the problems they are right now with the real estate market.
That's how you get bubbles, is because as prices go higher, people begin buying more and more as opposed to less and less. And the same thing with lenders. They do everything upside down. When values are here, they're doing 100% loans. When values are down here, they're doing 70% loans or 60% loans.
Now, Doug,
Well, it's exactly backwards. When values are low, they should be doing 100% loans because there's very little risk. And when values are up here, they should be doing 50% loans because there's huge risk. So both financial institutions and buyers, and this is because of my old professor of economics stuff, do everything exactly backwards. So you have to be able to disengage from that emotional herd mentality. And when times are bad and values are down, you don't just buy things because they're cheap, but then you look for things where, by the nature of what you do, you can add value. And then when the market comes back, you get two bumps. You get the bump that you create by your labor, and you get the bump that comes from the market going up.
Well, you know, when you explain it, it sounds so much like common sense.
It is, unfortunately. It's just common sense is not very common. And that's when I was professor of economics, that was one of the things. Human behavior is systematic, it's not rational. So you can model it and you can follow it, and they say history repeats itself.
Right.
Because we're systematic, but the parts that repeat itself are the good and the bad.
Yeah.
Well, the bad parts repeat because we're not entirely rational beings. Because our emotions and our intellect are at conflict a lot, and when you do what we do, we have to not go with our emotions. We have to go with objective criteria, visibility, access. Can we add value? You know, what kind of leverage can we get? What type of carry are we looking at? What's happening to the construction materials? And it's very helpful to have partners like Patrick, because
Patrick's coming up right now.
well, just Patrick, he has an architectural firm and he's a general contractor. So many times when you do this type of design work, particularly with historical, you hire architects and they design and they do things that are just absolutely beautiful. But they're not integrating into their design the fact that concrete is just tripled, steel is doubled, and cast iron has, quadrupled. Whereas when you have a partner who's a general contractor and an architect, then what happens is you get designs that we hope the tour will show you are quite pleasing and functional, but that also take into account what's happening to labor and material costs, so that you can, a penny saved is a penny earned, and Patrick saves us hundreds of thousands and many times millions of dollars on projects because he's in both worlds. And so he makes sure that the design team makes a design that can be built with the materials that are the most affordable in that time frame, and it's always changing. This project here,
it makes sense.
Patrick did a complete redesign. It was going to be mainly steel, structural steel building. Steel went way, way up, and so the next thing you know, we have a meeting and it's like, here's an alternative plan, and this is what it looks like if we go to steel reinforced concrete. And it saved us millions of dollars, and it was because of having this partnership where we have all of those types of capabilities within the family.
Actually, the partnership if you think about it logically, makes a lot of sense. Having someone from a financial, economic background, as well as an architectural construction background, so that you can go and save money. But what I find interesting is that if you've got a background of professor of economics, and these historic reservations, which don't exactly, I have to say, historic renovations, while beautiful, have had a reputation that you have to love it, and then you spend a lot of money on it, and you don't typically get out what you put into it. So it's always nice to see something different. So I'm curious how you end up getting into historic preservation and how it made sense to you.
I'm a victim of my public service.
Okay.
Actually, as a segue, I wanted to talk about the 11th Pavilion and Memorial Park and your appeal to that community.
Okay, well, we can definitely do that. Do we have the calendar here? Is it next door?
It's downstairs.
Oh, it's downstairs? But when I was in the U.S. Air Force, I was stationed in Europe for 7 years.
I can see where it came from.
And so I lived in England for 4.5 years, Germany for 2.5 years, and I just fell in love with historic buildings. And I have a penchant for bad puns, and I used to always say, if it ain't Baroque, don't fix it. So the older, beautiful communities like Rothenburg. I lived just outside of Oxford, in the Cotswolds, so I had an abiding love for historic buildings. And the way I ended up here is, and I guess this is a segue to Memorial Park, because 12 years ago I wanted to adopt some pugs. And there was a pug festival in that park, it's just right there. And I had never been to Pasadena before. And so I'm a typical guy, so I drove out here from the west side, and I had a Thomas guide, it just happened to be in the trunk of my car. So,
and you were going off memory?
So, no, I had no memory, I'd never been here before. So I knew where Pasadena was. So I drove, and I actually ended up a couple miles further down by the time I got off, and it was a Sunday morning. And there were no gas stations or anybody asked for directions. So I knew I'd gone a little too far, so I just zigzagged my way all the way from about Hill back to Old Pasadena. And by the time I got here, I was just in love with this area. And so I ended up adopting 2 pugs, Dex and Cassie, in the park. I ended up working for a 1.5 years to assemble this full block right here, which was my first project in the area. And then Barbosa Polverini and I, who's a general contractor who's actually, you'll see her work when you go to the 35 Union building. She did the interior finishes for the offices of Connonwood and Chidelmantle. We negotiated with the city with the help of the Mortimer Levitt Foundation. I don't know if you know Liz Levitt Hirsch. And we took possession of the old 1930s band shell. We renovated the band shell, renovated that whole part of the park, and it's now home to the 2nd largest free concert series in the country.
Wow.
So my anchor for historic stuff came from, or from renovating historic, came from my experience in Europe, my getting lost in Pasadena, adopting 2 dogs in the park, getting the bug to do something really of substance as far as a civic project along with Barbosa and with Liz.
Yes.
And so I was perked there. About 2 years into that process, we were trying to acquire more properties, and I made a bid for this building, and I was outbid by this gentleman here and his partner, Joel. And so I was extremely curious about how they managed to outbid me, because it was, in real estate, lots of times you lose a deal by like $5,000, $10,000, $50,000, and you go, okay, they outbid me by $800,000 on this building.
$800,000.
Yeah, and
he had the vision.
We didn't know that.
Well, I didn't know that. But I was the second bidder. Or, there were lots of bidders. I was in second place, and I was $800,000 behind them. And I just could never figure out what they were thinking, or how they could have outbid me by that much and still have it make sense. Because everything you do in real estate is you work it backwards. If you don't make the right decision on the front end, it doesn't matter what you do the rest of the way. So because...
Can you repeat that once more for our audience?
well, no, in real estate, it's the decision you make. You either buy it right or you don't. And if you buy it right, you can still make mistakes and maybe cover them, and still recover. But if you don't buy it right, even if everything else is correct from that point on, you're still not going to have a profitable project. So the key is being able to draw a line. Well, their line was way beyond mine. So I started going to their public hearings, which you always do for a neighboring property, because at the time we owned that whole block.
Right.
And what I discovered was they outbid me by $800,000, because while I had only figured out how to do a 4-story building on the site, they had figured out how to do a 5-story building on the site. So, and so I saw the design, I was really impressed, and I kind of glibly told Patrick and Joel, you guys outsmarted me. So I like to have partners who are smarter than myself. So if there's ever an opportunity to work together, please let me know. I'd like to work with you guys on some projects. And I don't know, 4, 5, 6 months later, one of their large investors, actually 60% of the deal, backed out 3 weeks before closing.